Before we start talking about classes in C#, I wanted to review a class that we did earlier in the year in Java. If you think back to when we talked about classes, I created this dog class, and we're just going to go through the parts because I want to be able to compare Java classes to classes in C#. So I'm going to point out some of the similarities and differences. And there's a lot of similarities, but there's also some significant differences on ways you can do things with C# over Java. So here's my class declaration. I got public class dog. Okay, and there's the open braces for that. And here's the end of the class down here at the bottom of my code. We start out, we have, in this case, we had 3 fields. Private string name, private age, private boolean groomed equals false. So in Java we call these fields. Then we had a couple constructors. Remember we talked about overloading constructors or overloading methods in general, but in this case we're overloading constructors. So we have a constructor for dog that only requires the name, and it sets the name for us. Okay. It's not doing anything with the age or whether it's groomed or not. So those things by default in Java, the age would be 0, and this would be set to false because we defined it up there in that field. Then we have another constructor here that accepts the name and the age and sets both of those. Remember, it takes the name parameter it's used internally for the method and sets the name field outside. So this name field up here is the field for the class. This name is the name for the parameter. So we use this to designate the item on the left. So we take the internal name, the local variable called name, and set the more global field with it. Okay, and we do the same thing for age, and that gets pretty repetitive, right? So there's constructors. So constructors, we declare our fields at the top, we declare our constructors. Next we have getters and setters. So I have a getter and setter for each of my fields most of the time. So I have a get name property that returns the contents of the name field. So these are all private up here. People can't access those directly from any other class. Okay, so other classes can't access that. If you want to know what value is held in the name, you have to run the getName method, and it returns the name. Okay, same thing for setIt. You don't set the field directly. You use the setName method, pass in a name, and that name can be used to set the field called name. And we have get and set for age. We also have a get and set for whether or not the dog's been groomed. That's a Boolean get and set. Okay. And then lastly, we have a toString method, which overrides the toString method in the object class. And basically for the toString method, we try to do something so that if we just print or use want to get information about the dog, we can call the toString method. Or it's called implicitly if we actually print the name of an object. In this case, it's printing out the dog's name and age. And I'm not sure why we don't have is groomed in here, but in this example, I must not have done it. I would like to see that in there. So it returns a string with the dog's name, age, and maybe I added is groomed later on this and never went back, but I like to return all the fields as part of that string that gets returned so people can see what's held in that object more easily. All right, so that's just a little review of a Java class. Because when you learn a new language, one of the best ways to learn is to compare it to something you already know. And we'll be doing this when we do JavaScript, when we do Python. We'll take the things we know about how the same concepts work in a language like Java. And when we learn about C#, we'll think about all the things that are the same, but we'll also pay attention to all the things that are different. Comparing the similarities and differences help you remember, especially when you're working if you work in multiple languages. It helps you remember how things are done. It helps you remember those important points that you're going to need to know. Okay, so there's going to be a lot of similarities in Java, but in C# to what we did in Java, but you're going to see a lot of differences too.